Hi, welcome back. This is Bill Quinn. I am honored today to be joined by David Clements, Professor David Clements, who has just recently reignited the professor's record. And so we wanted to have him back on and understand the topics that he's covering and also his thoughts of the time we're moving through. So David, thank you so much for making time for us today.
It's great to be with you, Bill.
So I've been fortunate enough to see Professor Clements speak before several county commissions here in Georgia and have followed many of the initiatives that he's been a part of. Gosh, you've been part of so many things. You've produced movies. Let My People Go is one example. You've been instrumental in the efforts to free Tina Peters that President Trump has just recently weighed in on, and hopefully that will come to fruition soon. Tell us the motivation or your thinking behind getting the professor's record, your publication, and now podcast back up to speed, and tell us some of your goals here, please.
Yeah, well, I really started off with the professor's record before I began any of those initiatives. I like you know, in the aftermath of November 3rd, 2020, I just had a ton of questions, and people that were trying to talk about COVID, stolen elections, were all censored and taken offline. And so I've dealt with that myself, but I was able to kind of find a place on Rumble and a few other places where my podcast would survive. And there really wasn't even an intention to do a podcast. It was, I have a curiosity to talk with this expert who's saying this about what happened with ballots in Georgia or someplace else. And I wanted to talk with people that submitted sworn affidavits. I wanted to talk with the attorneys. And so initially the professor's record was really, I think, and I don't mean to like brag or anything, but I really do believe this, that it was the first episodic podcast of its kind that had long form conversations that took the time, an hour, 2 hours, to really get into things that most people avoided for I don't know why they avoided it, but getting into the math, getting into the science, getting into statistical deviations. It's a really kind of a tough thing to ferret out the truth. And I mean, I have to admit right now that even my understanding of the problem was in its infant stage. So I look back at a lot of the episodes that I initially put out, and what you really see is a student trying to figure out what happened. But invariably, I saw the emergence of many social media folks out there that are much better at doing podcasts than me. And I felt like, okay, I want to move on from doing the podcast and get involved in actual audits and, commission meetings and see if we can actually improve the terrain, not just comment on what was going on. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is that I felt like the problem in combating the big lie, the real big lie, required a team effort. So I really didn't want to be like my own brand or my own guy. So from about 2022, I wanted to partner with as many freedom fighters just to see if we could build something that's akin to a media network. And so for 3 years, I kind of put my own personal stamp on of things in kind of on autopilot and tried to find other patriots to work alongside. And then 2025, Trump was sworn in, and we had this big blanket pardon for all of the J6ers, which is really my kind of crucible. It was my thing that I couldn't stop working on elections until they were free, because I'd never separated the two. Mm-hmm. And then they were free. We still have a few holdovers, but I kind of was struck with the finality of a real tangible victory. And I'm sitting there going, I don't have to get up tomorrow and do a podcast. I don't have to get up and do an interview. So I took about 8 months really trying to get away from all things media. Because at some point you kind of turn into a caricature of yourself. You're on autopilot. You're so used to just reciting facts that I didn't really feel like I had as deep a connection in my faith walk. And so it was a good time for me to just kind of shut up and say, Lord, what do you want me to do? And in that silence, I think the impression that I got was, you're not going to out clickbait people. You're not going to go ahead and saturate X with the madness. And it's not my personality, but perhaps offer something quiet and principled, and see if we can shepherd people over what we've all experienced for the past 5 years in a way that maybe even a year from now, some of these videos will still have relevance. So I wanted to get away from current events so much, and talk about principled lessons that should serve us well going forward.
I think that's remarkable, and it parallels in my mind so many things that I think a number of people are experiencing. That there was sort of this end of a phase feeling following the 2024 election and Trump's re-swearing in, and then since then it's been sort of a different phase with the revelations coming out. Early on, things like money flow, USAID money going to all kinds of places, the connections between USAID and some bad actors, George Soros and others, the connections between some of that money and trafficking, especially child trafficking, that have come to light and continue to invade people's dreams and nightmares, if you will, to figure out what's behind that and how to get it to stop. And yet even today, and we just talked about this on another show over the last few days, there's this undercurrent of still people hidden, I think, powers hidden that are pushing back on what Trump is attempting and already in many cases accomplishing. Much of what we saw early on had to do with stopping conflicts, hopefully, or bringing them close to stopping. I think just recently he talked about being able to stop 6 wars, and yet we still struggle apparently with the Ukraine-Russia conflict, at least to some extent. But it is interesting now that we see support for President Trump, even in doing these things, coming from all kinds of places, including apparently Russia. So it begs the question, we were filled with these narratives. Russia's the bad guys. Russia was collaborating with Trump. We've now found that to be completely untrue. And it's a time when it's difficult, I think, for many to accept, gosh, how many lies have we been told? And by whom and why? Why underneath all of this? Why so much push to unseat Trump, who accomplished so much during his first presidency and now is attempting and pushing to accomplish so much in his second? How do you guide people to make sense of that? What is behind this hatefulness to what Trump has and continues to accomplish?
Well, I think you hit it on the head already, that once you come to the conclusion that your own government and your own media lies to you every day, then it's not a giant leap to at least pose the question, are they lying to us about Putin? Are they lying to us about Russia? At least parts of it, right? So there's that. I think for me to maintain my sanity, it's always a good measure to take a step back and look at the larger picture. And I always start with, the spiritual dynamics of something, that good and evil exist, right? And you've got a kingdom of heaven and you've got a kingdom of darkness. And the scriptures really, really highlight what it is to be in each camp. There's the father of lies, and the children echo the lies. So when I look at the media and I look at people that don't have the blood-bought purchase of Jesus Christ in their life, they can't help themselves but to parrot things. I don't even think they're conscious of it. So I look at us like we're kind of just human vessels that are for sale in some respects. Mm-hmm. And the things that come out of Bill Quinn's mouth or my mouth, if we're contemplating truth, should be above board. And what we find are, aspects of the world, whether it's media, whether it's big pharma, whether it's big tech, they can't help but create BS in everything that they touch and do. And so once you kind of have that very, very simple, architecture in mind, you can kind of watch things in a way that doesn't get you off course one way or the other. Because if you don't frame it through a biblical lens, you get stuck into this frenzy of trying to trust a patriot or this guy or this guy. And when they get it wrong, you're wrong with them. You know what I mean? So there's like, and you see it with the controversy with, like, say, Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and Ben Shapiro and Scott Presler. There are manifestations of people that are more or less supposed to be on our side. And yet the constant noise, conflict, and controversy among quote unquote conservatives really does seem to keep the American people off balance. Like we're just waiting for the other shoe to drop is kind of my perception. Like, well, what does he think? And I get this question all the time. It's like, well, do you trust so-and-so? Do you trust so-and-so? Or do you think this person's good? And the honest answer is no. And I don't know. I mean, really, it's one of those things where you're constantly saying, okay, is what they're saying in alignment with, truth as we find it in the scriptures? And so that's the way that I process these things. I don't always do it perfectly. Sometimes I get caught up in the drama just like everyone else. And I've got people that I love and respect and care about, and others that drive me crazy. But when it comes to, a lot of the things that are coming out even now with evidence over vaccines, devastating testimony.
Yeah.
And yet everyone that's MAGA already knew this, right? But it's amazing that we were able to weather this megaphone from, legacy media telling us that we're dangerous, that we're going to kill people. And it's the exact opposite. So, having that anchor in truth has served us well over the past 5 years, and we're being vindicated by the day.
Yeah. As you were speaking about this, one of the things that struck me was that we've, in many cases, folks have reported that they can literally see the wiles of evil and good in ways that either we didn't notice before or weren't there as blatantly as they are now. We've quoted examples like during the Olympics a number of times. Let me show this picture. So, many people took a look at this during the Olympics opening ceremony and said, whoa, wait a minute. Mm-hmm. We don't make fun of Christianity, or you should not. That's evil. That's evil on a level that we haven't seen. And even many people around the world spotted this and other things. There were a number of things that happened during the same ceremonies. And it's for reasons that perhaps we don't fully understand yet, it appeared to be evil making itself known, making itself apparent, even to people that heretofore might not have noticed. And it's kind of like looking at the little, thousands of tiny little miracles around that we walk by every day, or have perhaps, and you don't see them. Well, and yet they become apparent once you're looking for them.
While you're putting that up there,
sorry.
No, why you did? I'm glad that you did, but it spurred something that I wanted to, run by you before I forget it. Because oftentimes especially with libertarians, we talk about how god awful the government is at everything, right? And there's this tension created because on the one hand, we're saying that they're inept at everything, yet they seem to be so great in depopulation efforts. They seem to have a centralized hub in the way that they communicate. And I think what I brought up before, this idea of two kingdoms, really resolves what may appear at first blush a contradiction, which is you've got finite human vessels, but you have ancient evil. And it's the ancient evil that works behind the scenes or in the shadows through these sociopath puppets, the Zelenskys of the world, that really do have a brilliant plan for Team Evil. And so when I see that horrendous image mocking the Lord's Supper, I don't think that that's like in the brain trust of an individual that's sitting there going, let's go ahead and blaspheme the Christian church. I think that spirit is basically whispering in people, wrestling their cognitive faculties and steering them in a direction. And you can do that to hundreds of millions of people that are kind of ripe for the taking. But the good news is that, Christian believers saw right through that because they've got the Spirit of truth working through them. And so, I'm trying to really wrestle with this idea of where does revelation come from? I mean, people can call it intuition. They can call it, that their hunch. But I really think that's the Holy Spirit whispering to them on what's true and what's not. And almost every time in my life where I've tried to silence that intuition, it hasn't served me.
Yeah. The intuition is a very interesting word to use in many venues that I've been lucky enough to speak at. We'll often ask the question, are we in a war? Question almost undoubtedly is answered yes. Are we in a spiritual war? And the answer's resoundingly yes. And so you have to then consider, well, what does that mean? How do you deal with that? And you touch on that. You actually go quite deep into it in one of your latest Professor Records episodes in talking about the battle. You use the chessboard as an analogy for such a battle. Yeah. And the fact that it's not in the here and now in the way that many people might see it. Using Ephesians as a guidance, it's in a different realm. It's in a different way than people are used to. Can you expand on that a little bit? Because this battle is, I think it's something that everybody is potentially involved in, may not realize it, but they have a role, they have a path, if in fact they're listening.
Well, I think, again, you hit it on the head, because I've been to many of those community meetings where we talk about this is a spiritual war, and everyone nods their head, but then they never look at what the Bible says about the spirit and how to wage war. And it's like we push out that up to a point, like we'll all look around and nod in agreement, and then we will rely purely on our rational senses. And I've heard it all before. Well, God gave me a brain, I'm going to use it. Well, yes. But again, if you're dealing with a problem that is unseen, and how do you match wits with something that you can't touch and feel? Mm-hmm. And yet we all acknowledge that evil's real, that the devil's real. So I see it kind of like this. The Apostle Paul talks about being called up to third heaven. And I've heard people say, well, logic tells you if there's three heavens, there's at least two more. And our understanding is that, first heaven's kind of what we see up in the sky. And then second heaven is this area where the spirits kind of duel and battle. They're effectively ministering angels and messengers. And that's an area that I think most of the warfare is taking place. And then you've got third heaven, which is the throne room of God Almighty. And that's where the real power is. And so when we look at the scriptures and Daniel's praying, he's praying to the throne room. The message is received, and God wants to help Daniel. He wants to answer his prayers and save him. So he dispatches the archangel Michael through second heaven. He's delayed by the prince of Persia. Mm-hmm. And so you look at these stories in the Bible, and you're sitting there going, well, are we missing something here in our application in the here and now in fighting against these princes and principalities in the modern age? Because we're talking about themes of slavery. I mean, through the rigged election systems, we're talking about depopulation, genocidal behaviors that are demonic in nature. And have we abandoned probably the most powerful tool? And the rationalist will usually say, well, look, faith sounds great, but you're basically telling me that it's better to walk blindfolded, because that's kind of what I'm hearing. And so the question that's presented in that video essay is really, understanding that it's actually the most rational thing that you can do is put on the blindfold and not play chess, but have God play you. In the sense that if you were to sit down at a chess table and play Satan, this cosmic being that's played chess millions and millions of times, you would get trounced. And even a facial tick could alert him to your intentions. And so the fact that we telegraph everything through the natural is our demise, especially when you're dealing with nation state problems. So I look at faith as the most rational way of securing victory, which is if God is real, if the Holy Spirit is ever present, all knowing, that in his time and in his choosing, he can supply you with information, say, hey, move here, maybe hold off before you file that lawsuit. We're trying to do some work in the spirit over here. Maybe you let us finish that work before you butt in. And there's this submissive quality that I think really inoculates us and protects us from the grand designs of the enemy. And that's kind of what I was trying to get out, that yes, by all means, use your reason, use your rationality, use your intellect, but have it in service to something that's far smarter than you. And you'll find that miracles do happen.
Yeah. You going back to something you mentioned a few minutes ago, one of the questions, or one of the, I'll call it pieces of evidence that you might ponder, is given the fact that we'll use they for the moment, their plan was to get everybody inoculated with these shots such that there would be impact across everyone. What is it that caused, I think the number right now is 17 to 20% of people to, despite anything that was coerced upon them, to say no? What was that led those people to make a different decision? And it's something that's difficult to answer as we sit here today, but perhaps might be an example.
It's elemental, and I think it's not difficult, but it's difficult in the sense that we don't want to admit that we were afraid. The people that took it were every one of them, if you get down to brass tacks, took the jab because they were afraid. They were afraid of losing their job, a pension. They were afraid of sitting down at the dinner table with their family and being judged for it. They were afraid that they couldn't visit a loved one in a hospital. But the root of it all was fear. And we're told to not fear. And so at some point, the people that held out and didn't take it, we had the same concerns and the same struggles as everyone else. Like, look, and many people suffered for exercising faith that, I would rather lose my job than have that poison in my daughter or that poison in my own veins. And that was the big separation between the two, is some people were able to master their fear. But going forward, it's like, okay, well, what do? We can't shame people to death. There's going to be a temptation to do that. But at the same time, we can't forget what happened. I don't think we've truly learned the full extent of what these depopulation engineers have done to us, and in just killing babies, unborn, harming mothers that were pregnant with children. And as that comes out, you just have to know that there's going to be a concerted evidence or a concerted effort for the people that were complicit to pivot, alter, destroy, give themselves cover to justify their actions. And I don't think we should do that. I think what we should be looking for are acknowledgments that you guys screwed the pooch. You really did hurt your country. And we'd be willing to move on, provided that there's justice for those that were the architects of it. I don't judge people for submitting to fear, but to the extent that their fear had them in an assistive role where they were dispensing the jab, where they were purveyors of propaganda, they should be dealt with severely.
Yeah. You use the word justice, and that brings us to a very key point, that key area that you spoke of in your latest releases. And I pulled this from one of those podcasts that you put out, and it speaks of arrest tribunals and war powers, And the underpinning, as I understand it, is really about what is it going to take to reach justice given what's happened. And it isn't just the health effects of what you just discussed, but it's also the attempts to overthrow a government, to undermine the will of the people. And perhaps, one of my own senses is, how many different ways do we execute our righteous will, other in the real world, in this realm, if you will, other than through elections? We pick our leaders. We pick those who we hope are the best among us. And when that's undermined, isn't that a direct impact on our freedom of will?
It is. I just think about how difficult it is with the election landscape for someone to even be elected dog catcher if the uniparty really wanted to keep you from a race. They really are that organized when it comes to preserving the power structure that they inhabit.
Yeah.
And so you look at Trump and you're sitting there going, how in the world did he get in the first time? How in the world did he get in the last time? Knowing how difficult it is, knowing that the entire world really detests what this man stands for in wrecking globalism and making America great again. And so one of the things that it's forced me to do is take a look at Trump, not so much at what he says, because there's a lot of misdirection, there's a lot of bluffing, there's a lot of cajoling. He's trying to expose people, but just looking at his track record for results. And so I think that, and I could be wrong, but I think there's a primary ethos at work in Trump that he truly looks at the problem he wants to solve first. And he has a vision towards solving that problem. And it could be 10 years in the future. Mm-hmm. And it really comes down to how in the world do I make that right? And then he'll do whatever is necessary to get to that destination. But he's not interested in telegraphing and telling you how he's going to do it. And the reason why this is important, the reason why I brought up that article, this idea of invasion and rebellion, this idea of Trump's Article 2 powers being vast in the context of a wartime president, is that there's no way to solve that problem, the swamp, draining the swamp, unless you have the military have a role in bringing about justice. What I'm saying is that it's impossible through the civilian court system to drain the swamp in 3.5 years. And so I'm sitting there going, okay, legally, I'm not Trump. I don't have his mastery of strategy, but there is a way to get to that result before his time is up. And the only way, as I see it, is to have something where insurrection is declared, due process rights are minimized. I don't say this is something that I naturally advocate for, but in a place of war and treason, you don't allow someone like James Clapper to post bail and wait out the clock. You don't allow, Brennan to take advantage of his relationships and have a judge slow roll your case until Trump's gone. Mm-hmm. You basically have to put your thumb on those that have aided and abetted a rebellion, both at the border that was physical and a digital rebellion that's taken place in our elections. And I see all kinds of legal things that have occurred that absolutely allows Trump to do things by the book, by law. But it's the subject that really gets a lot of people's hackles up, because the only historical guidepost is Lincoln. Mm-hmm. And he didn't do things as pure as the driven snow, in the sense that to suspend the writ of habeas corpus, even in targeted fashion, that is a power that's expressly given to Congress, not to the executive. But I think Lincoln understood that if you already are in the midst of a rebellion, a Confederate rebellion, then how could you ever rely on them to constitutionally suspend it? You're already too far gone. You're already too fractured. And so Lincoln took a chance, and it was a gamble. There's no guarantee that Congress 2 years later was going to affirm what he did through a suspension act. And I think Trump is in exactly the same spot, because now it's not necessarily a confederacy where people are wearing gray uniforms. You've got a uniparty confederacy that's by and large selected, that that it's so much harder to tell who is friend or foe, but it happened. And one of the beautiful nexus points that I think has been provided by Stephen Miller every time he comes out and gives a brief to the American people is he makes it a point to bring up invasion and rebellion. Mm-hmm. And people keep thinking in terms of physical invasion. And but the election experts out there know that millions and millions of people that cross that border were added to our voter rolls. And ballots were printed in their name. They didn't vote them, but they were voted for the illegal invader in drop boxes. And so that tells me that if you wanted to, you could have targeted suspension of habeas corpus for the bad invaders and also the orchestrators of the system. And one of the things that I've been thinking through, and I'll yield after I pose this question, but I think it's very, very interesting that 20 JAG officers were sworn in to fight crime in Washington, D.C., number one. And number two, that 600 JAG officers were deployed to help with immigration. And the reason why I pose that question is that JAG officers have a very, very specialized and intense training when you enter into the military and go that route. Some of the best trial attorneys actually start off in the JAG Corps. Mm-hmm. You don't send them to DC to do garden variety crime. I know crime's a problem, but that's what you give to law students that just graduated to cut their teeth, get their training, vagrancy, trespassing, assault, domestic battery. Those cases are usually done for first year associates at the DOJ's office. And there is many attorneys want those jobs. They're actually really great jobs to get. So I have a problem hearing the cover story that Jeanine Pirro is understaffed, can't find people, so they're going to have JAG officers there. I think there's something else at work. Perhaps they're technical liaisons that need to create some type of synergy between military code and what's going on in the civilian courts. Likewise, just as General Grant, when he was president, was able to suppress the Ku Klux Klan Act, he did targeted suspension in 9 counties. And that's something that's really important for your viewers, is that I was always raised with the idea that when Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus, it was just this blanket suspension. He was just trampling all over the Constitution. It was strategic, it was geographically based, and it was itemized for certain people that were proven to have at least assisted in something that looked like treason. And you could do that with those 600 immigration JAGs across the country. You've got 50 states, election fraud in all 50. Who's to say that they're not there for another reason? At least that's my hope. So I'm speculating here. I don't have any information, but I'm just going to tell you, as a line prosecutor, these are niches that are very, very specialized. And I've just never seen in my career the military sending lawyers to help with immigration cases and whatnot.
Well, you I think touched on part of it earlier in your comments, and that is military law and the processes therein are substantially different than civilian law, aren't they? And so would you normally even expect a civilian prosecutor to understand the notion of the things necessary under military law?
Mm-mm. No, in fact, that's one of the biggest frustrations, is that I have many friends that are attorneys, and they all have the penchant to think that they're the most brilliant people and smartest people in the world. The problem is none of them have experience in what we're talking about. Neither do I. Now I'm learning about it, and I'm researching it because I'm a student of history. Mm-hmm. But it's foreign. It's foreign. And one of the things is, it would be stupid tactically for a JAG attorney to want to fight in a civilian courtroom when that doesn't favor what they're going after. There's got to be a way of looking at this. Like, you've got different compartments. You've got the military compartment. You've got the civilian compartment. From a due process standpoint, the military court is far superior for a prosecutor, because your due process rights aren't the chief consideration. It's national security. So you don't have the same presumptions. You don't have necessarily the presumption of innocence. You certainly aren't entitled to all discovery. Many of the things that are classified, you don't get as the accused. You don't have to, you're not entitled to a unanimous verdict. You're not entitled to a jury of your peers. You get a panel of national security experts, and they don't have to agree. They just need a majority. And so that, for a prosecutor sitting there going, it's like shooting, fish in a barrel. Now, so if I was a JAG attorney, there's no way that I would want to wade into the area of Pam Bondi, where rights are really everything.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how they tie up the court system. So if someone wanted to consult me and ask for my advice, I would find your 1,000 deep state traitors that are guilty of treason, and you make sure that they are all firmly put in the military court column. And to the degree that you've got people that have committed election fraud, you give them a plea offer, and you tell them, we can either put you in this column if you don't want to plea out, or if you want to plea out, we can facilitate that in a civilian court. Basically, you do to them what they did to us over January 6th through this shock and awe campaign, where very few trials even went, but you had a 99.9% conviction rating. And most of the resolution was secured through plea deals because they were scared. Difference is actually you have just grounds to do it this way, but you can resolve tens of thousands of cases very quickly with this system. But if the military is not feeding and providing technical expertise to the civilians to really apply leverage, I don't see you draining the swamp in 3.5 years. I don't see us winning the election next year. And I see Trump potentially being a lame duck president. I don't believe that's going to happen, but this tells me they're going to have to move very, very fast. In the next 2 months, there's got to be at least momentum that we can all see with our eye, not with the administration having, they obviously have things at their disposal that we can't see. But at some point, there's going to have to be an event that is so polarizing that the American people have to digest before we get to this idea that people can be tried, sentenced, and if necessary, feel the full weight of the law.
Yes. So you described it as, we can't tell what the reason is for these JAG attorneys to have been put in these positions, yet there must be something there. And it has this feeling of seeing the movement, but not the reasons behind something. We can't tell the motivation, but we can see the actions. And there's a couple actions that happened earlier in previous weeks, many of which have been things like Tulsi Gabbard coming out and disclosing the evidence that they found on the people that you and beyond that you mentioned, Brennan, Comey, Clapper, and others. And the fact that this was specifically a Russiagate, and probably many more things that we don't know about yet, were deliberate attempts to undercut the government, to take Trump out of power, even before, in some cases, he had been sworn in.
Yeah.
And this goes back several weeks. But even before that, there was something that came out from the president himself, which now in retrospect seems important. And it's this post that he put out. I believe it's back in May, if I'm correct. And he said, all roads lead to Obama. Well, what has Tulsi Gabbard disclosed? Well, this was in many ways driven by Obama and his nearby cohorts to create these things that we've now learned about. And underneath, he says, read truth if you want public military tribunals. Isn't that interesting, given now what's happened with these JAG officers? I don't know that we can draw a full conclusion, but it is
Yeah.
I'll call it interesting with a capital I.
Yeah, and it's really not. It would be unwise of Trump to lay it out so clearly that we could understand it, because if we can understand it, his enemies can. And so there's a level of misdirection. I think Tulsi's absolutely telling the truth when she says, "Mr. President, we've referred for investigation to the DOJ the following names," right?
Yeah.
And but to me, it's sitting there going, well, has the military received a referral or acting in their own jurisdiction, meaning we don't even have to wait for a referral. We actually don't need Tulsi to give us anything.
Mm-hmm.
We've got them in the crosshairs for our own type of justice. And I say this because remember when there was the strategic strike in Iran, I think it was Iran, right? Tulsi seemed like she was out of the loop.
Oh, yes.
With what, President said, no, she doesn't know. She doesn't know what she's talking about, which is odd that the head of ODNI didn't have the same type of briefing that the commander-in-chief did. So that tells me that there is a military side of this that really was carrying out the task that we saw. And you've got people that are very gifted politicians that are effectively communicating what needs to be communicated. They're all gifted communicators, as kind of this buffer zone between the public and the military. But it's clear to me that Tulsi didn't have all of the information, and yet something that was a wartime action, something that only a commander-in-chief could direct, happened without her full understanding. I hope that's what's going on here with the Truth Post. But this gets back to my observation when we started, which is you have to have an idea of what victory looks like years in advance. And you have to figure out, okay, how do I get there? There's no way to get to what Trump wants before this administration's up, absent the military's involvement. I mean, look, I've wargamed this every which way that you can. And the court system that I practice in does not lend itself well to this problem. So, a lot of people get frustrated because, like, is this hopium? Is he just trolling? Is he slow walking? Because under their expectations, we were supposed to wrap this whole thing up in the first administration. Mm-hmm. Right. And, but our biggest issue has always been our own brainwashing, that we weren't sufficiently awake to the problem. And it really would have taken something like the 2020 election and the big rig to provide enough sufficient pain points for the American people to wake up. Because if Trump would have, we've talked about this in the past, secured control legally, and he was entitled to do that, there still wasn't enough evidence that was so clear and convincing that you could eradicate anyone's doubt about whether or not someone should be executed, be put before a firing squad. But now you've got 4 years of efforts of the Biden regime, Obama, everyone covering up the crime, doubling down, people shooting at the president, trying to kill him, that there's really no doubt that if Trump were to exercise his authority under Article 2 as a wartime president, heads, figuratively, should roll.
Yeah. If I may, there's a couple other topics that I think are very important, especially at a personal level, perhaps for folks to consider as we go forward. One of the things you touched on that I found very important and could relate to personally is this notion of within a family, especially now, and especially given what we're facing when you look at the big picture, the good versus evil thing, and the number of confusing elements in the world today. The notion of the role of family, especially husband and wife, and how critical that is, that be healthy, sensitive, connected in ways that are operationally meaningful, for lack of a better way of putting it. Could you spend just a few minutes and expand on that? Because I think I have felt troubled by people we know personally that maybe don't have those kind of connections. And I'm hoping that with a bit of insight, some might be able to reignite or refine those kinds of things.
Yeah. So the last Professor's Record article and video essay was titled Husbands and Wives Unite. And I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to write the article. And it's pretty clear if you actually watch it, and I invite your listeners to watch it. Why? Because it's a landmine. It's just a landmine field. So many people have their way of defining roles for women, for men. And let me be clear, I've got a very, very traditional outlook on men leading. But there's a problem when you start looking at these theological categories of complementarianism or egalitarianism, because you can hijack both. You really can. And the way that I see hijacking in complementarianism is that you might have the scriptural weight in your corner for a man to lead and exercise authority, but there's usually this strict legalism when it's unhealthy, where there's an empty appeal to authority, and it's not Christ-like in the way that you sacrifice for your wife. And so if you find yourself having to assert your authority, you don't have it. Mm-hmm. I think that was the point I wanted to raise with that, and that many women feel very, very marginalized and not a partner. And the reason why I felt it was necessary to put this article out is that when I traveled through 49 states in election integrity efforts, I can't tell you, Bill, how many times I was stopped by usually a woman. It wasn't the men, a woman doing all of the heavy lifting and fighting for our country. And they would tell me, my husband won't get involved. They're like a weight around my neck. They don't want me at this meeting. They don't want me to do this. And I'm sitting there going, men, what gave you the place to even have an opinion on headship if you're letting your wife do all of the sacrificial battling on behalf of our country? And then you have the egalitarian camp. And just understand there's a spectrum. There's kind of a merging and blending depending on where people, want to hang their hat, which is you also have women that lead. And it's in many respects, I've seen women leading and they find submission to male leadership so offensive. And it's usually rooted in some form of trauma where a man has abused or betrayed them. And we start getting into these really, really combative discussions on roles and capabilities and what women can do and whether they can do them as well as men. And I think the pressure point that came to me, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is that they don't really see a vision for their equality in the way that it's presented in the church, meaning you've got express text in the Bible that says, men, be like Christ, die for, or sacrifice for your wife the way that he sacrificed for the church. There's an explicit call to men to mirror Christ. And you don't necessarily have an express mention, women do this like Christ. And it kind of, everyone's kind of trying to grab one person of the Trinity to give them some type of inherent dignity. And I'm sitting there going, what about the Holy Spirit? Isn't that a person? And what are the qualities? They're the divine helper, the divine counselor. And we're told in the Garden of Eden how Adam couldn't do it alone. He needed a helper. And so when you start looking at the Holy Spirit and you get away from the gender roles and you get away from all of the woke thinking, you've got an example of the unified Godhead, perfectly complete. And the Holy Spirit is not lesser in any respect. He's absolutely equal and indispensable to make the Godhead work. And yet he's always offering guidance, counsel, help, gentleness. And I think between men and women, my experience is that women reflect those qualities more than men. In fact, my wife's intuition on a spiritual level is much better than mine. And usually when I have a foot and mouth problem or I react out of anger, it's because I didn't heed her gentle counsel. And it would have served us both well. So when I embarrass myself, guess what? I also embarrass my wife. And so I think if women could see the Holy Spirit as really the person in the Trinity that really spells out their equality, I think a lot of the tensions would dissipate. They would see themselves as full partners in this. Yet we're not squandering anything when it comes to what the Bible says about a men exercising authority in the home. But it's both mutual submission to the Father. They both understand how to strengthen one another. And it really also reflects this notion that in Genesis, when we marry, we become one. And one of the concepts that I put in this video is that if you're winning arguments against your spouse, how does defeating half of yourself ever look like victory? So the application in my mind is that if we're going to reclaim this country through activism in elections and against big pharma, that we're better served if men and women really see each other as indispensable in the fight going forward, because we basically won this battle through duct tape and Band-Aids, where none of that's really materializing. It's very rare to see couples in the fight together, and I'd like to see that change.
Yeah, it's funny you should bring that up. And a couple of things that you mentioned rang as true as a bell when you said them just now. One has to do with insight. I've found in my own marriage, which I find just is a blessing. My wife, in many ways, has insights that are far superior to my own, especially initial guidance on individuals. She can see things that they're just not in my sight. I can't sense them the same way that she can, but she's very, very often correct. In time, we get to see these things, don't we? The other thing is, you mentioned partnership, and if you generalize it to many men associate what they do in their life with what they do in their business life, if you will, I think. And if you think of the very best teams do not have the same person duplicated across the entire team. They are made up of people with diverse viewpoints, diverse skills, diverse opinions, diverse insight. And yet they come together in ways so that, 1 + 1 is more than 2. And I think that's true spiritually. I think it's true intellectually. I think it's true relationship-wise. And so I was very, very touched by that particular episode. And I think it would bear fruit for many folks to at least consider and look at themselves and do some introspection and see, could I do better? Could I help my partner?
Well, let me say this real quick. If people do watch it, I want them to know that it's drawn from 1,000. It's a composite of 1,000 different experiences that I've had, and I really want people to know that it's brought through kind of this parable of 3 houses. I'm not suggesting to anyone that I am in the best house. That there are elements of me that are found in all 3 houses. So the first house really talks about, without overtly telling you, where male headship goes awry. The second, where women leading goes awry, and the third is kind of this perfect utopian vision. Every single thing that I would suggest is a criticism against either camp, I have fallen victim to at some point during my 20 plus years of marriage. And because a lot of people might just get in their mind that somehow I got it figured out. My wife and I have what we call quarterly meetings. There's things that I can look back and with complete embarrassment that if I had heeded my wife's counsel, we both would have been better off. And so there's a lot of kind of reflection and repentance. And again, a lot of people that saw it, I think I threaded the needle as best as I could. But when I get criticism, because I've gotten a lot of criticism for that episode, not a ton, but basically it was the audience that I'm kind of indicting, which is, yeah, you're the legalist. Yeah, you're the one that's basically appealing to authority, and that's why this triggers you so much. Or it's a woman that is kind of like the ultra feminist that just hates men, and the notion of what I'm doing still triggers a trauma that's understandable. But Yeah. So if anyone watches this and thinks that I somehow am talking about you, chances are I'm not. But I can tell you that so many people have reached out saying, "This is my life. This happened to me. This is my husband. This is my wife." And I don't have a crystal ball into it. It's just 20 years of screwing up and trying to figure out how to make my own relationship better.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about the things that have brought us to this point. Beginning for me anyway, back in 2020, and beginning to notice things that just what I say don't fit. And it isn't just the elections, it's other things. But hopefully we're learning that to get to truth, to get to truthful outcomes is critical to this going forward. What do you see as some of the possibilities for folks when they've been perhaps put in difficult legal postures and other things that they might consider as we go forward? Are there things that you're seeing that might help people take a better stance for themselves?
Yeah, well, the subject for this weekend's article I'm putting the finishing touches on right now, and it's about pro se lawfare. And I don't think it's any coincidence that our ability to survive bad medical advice in pharma, bad advice on elections, that it was really we the people figuring it out ourselves and coming to terms with the fact that we've got really powerful people that really want to continue lying to us to keep the status quo. And so we've seen a mastery of people that are becoming expert researchers and advocates in shutting down the lie. And that's why we're now living to fight another day. I think the next frontier is for laypersons to reclaim the courts. And because when you look at attorneys writ large, there's a few good ones, but writ large over the past 5 years, uniformly they're cowards when it came to COVID and elections. Cowards. The ones that stood up were crushed. Some are still standing. And so we have to start demystifying the legal system and understanding that a plumber, a lumberjack, they should be able to have access to these courts and not be tied up in this satanic system that you have to master the rules of procedure. And if you mess up on a technical violation somehow, the larger substantive claim that's afflicted you goes out the window. And that's typically what happens. And I think that this is possible, that the profession can be reclaimed through AI. And so this is a really tough subject because I think that AI in many respects presents an existential crisis for critical thinking and for people learning things on their own, because it can be spoon-fed information can be spoon-fed in microseconds. But I can tell you right now, I've used Grok as a lawyer and I'm stunned, absolutely stunned by the accuracy. It's not always right, but it's able to find things in seconds that used to take me weeks to unearth and learn in the legal system. And now pro se litigants can basically do the same search queries. They might have to have some refinement on how to go about looking for information that's relevant. But there's a huge equalizer effect that's going to go on through the Grok and Chat GPTs that you at least will have an argument and a reference to go look and ferret things down, which leaves only really one thing that elevates the lawyer over the layman, which is just mastery of an environment, because they're able to proceed past the bar, if you will, and enter to the well of a courtroom and make arguments. So we can still represent other people. But pro se litigants, to the extent that they're representing their own interests, can go into the well of the courtroom. And I would invite them to have the attitude that this is a great place to have your screw ups and learn from your mistakes. And the more that you engage into a legal setting, your anxiety and fear will subside. People need to realize that attorneys, there was a time where every one of us had no experience. And I remember dry heaving in a wastebaskets, worried that I'm going to screw up a case, being so nervous on briefing, having to regulate my breathing because I'm so nervous talking to a judge. These are all things that you master through going in there, taking your lumps, and then doing a kind of a deep debrief process and going back in there. So many of the pro se litigants that I counsel and I help provide guidance here and there are just little tools on, okay, find the rules, expect this with the judge, expect this lie from the attorney, understand that they're going to try to do this. And it's really not about the truth. Unfortunately, it's really not about the truth. It's about looking for little slips because you don't know the rules as well as they do and getting your case, what we call shit canned. And most pro se lawsuits have resulted that in dismissal that was premature. What I'm finding now is that with Grok, many people that have continued to go back and fight, they're not getting their cases dismissed out of hand. They're actually living to get to the next step and the next step and the next step. So I see a natural growth projection, but it's going to take thousands of people, especially if we have another rigged election where people utilize these tools and do that. So my next article really covers much of that through some of my own experiences, because even though I'm a lawyer and a law professor, I've handled most of my litigation pro se for me because I can't afford an attorney. I'd be bankrupt if I had to hire one to represent my interests. And it's probably the biggest leverage point in every settlement discussion. Usually has nothing to do with the dispute itself. It usually comes down to, holy crap, I cannot afford to pay the invoice I just received from my attorney. So they will use that as a leverage point to settle things, and no one's ever happy. So if we can get to a place where we can avoid attorney fees and you can get in court and do an adequate job, that's big for the country.
Attorney's fees are often one of those things asked for as relief in a number of cases, aren't they? We have a case going on right now in Fulton County where the judge has already essentially said that he intends to grant attorney's fees to the plaintiff because of what's been done to circumvent the will of one of the organizations here in Georgia.
Yeah. One thought on that, and even that's going to be frustrating because many of the public entities that we sue have Association of Counties insurance providers where it's really the taxpayer that's paying it. So there's still this idea of like when you sue a Fulton County, it's not like the commissioners, as far as I'm concerned, or as far as I know, are opening up their own checkbook saying, okay, it's coming out of my own bank account. And that's frustrating.
It is. And that's exactly what's happening. They've been ordered to pay certain funds, and yet they're not the ones paying it. It's the county. And so I did want to share with folks how to find your information and the professor's record. I think I got each of these right. So I've one of the key places to coordinate is through X and your account there, but then you have a Substack, and of course you have the YouTube posting of the professor's record with each episode. You mentioned you have one coming up. Can you share when that will be released?
Yeah. So big news today. I'm actually, after this podcast, going to walk over to the courthouse and file a pro se lawsuit against my former employer for their forced coercive mandate that altered my teaching methods. Because when I signed a contract, and I used to teach contract law, I don't remember signing a document that says you can force experimental injection into my body. And it altered the course of the delivery of instruction, both by faculty and the way that it was received by students. And then there's another theory that I'm going to pursue, which is this thing called the Unfair Practices Act. And basically you see this in commercial settings where, used car salesmen, if they lie to you about cars, we call that kind of lemon law. There's usually a way to get what we call treble damages that have a punitive effect. Well, I think for too long, public institutions have tried to misdirect people thinking that they are purely public. A university is a commercial setting. My university does billions of dollars in output. through commercial transactions. And when they deceive the public about, the safety of using a mask to mitigate COVID, when that's BS, that should fall under the purview of the Unfair Practices Act, because business is being dealt. So it's under those two working causes of action that I'll be filing a lawsuit today. And the article that will be published this Sunday will kind of carry you through my journey on my pro se battles with, just an announcement that I'm not done yet and I'll continue to fight. So if people are interested in learning about that and getting advance notice of it, Substack seems to be the best place to use. I know not everyone's there. You have to get the app. But I'd invite you to do that because it's really the only place that I've found where I'm not censored and shadow banned into oblivion. It's really frustrating trying to reach people when someone's got some type of way to throttle the message. So, but depending on where you're at, if you go to my website, which is hyperlinked there in the X post, theprofessorsrecord.com at the very top, you'll find that there are direct links to every single social media platform that I'm on. But Substack is really the one where I'd love to have people be involved, because I might start coming off of the other ones if I can't solve this shadow banning problem.
Mm-hmm. And they can actually, if they wish and have the means, they can actually support your records, your efforts through Substack as well. Is that right?
Yeah, this is the part that I hate, but I have basically worked for free for about 5 years, and I'm at the point where I can't do it. The content's still free. But yeah, I'd be lying to you if I didn't need the help for monthly subscriptions. And so if you want to support me and you find that the work is edifying, for about $8 a month, you can be a sponsor. Some people can be founding members if they've got greater resources. And it really helps me absorb the cost of, license fees here, using libraries for this, and having an editor help me with the videos. And so I'm just trying not to go in the hole. And the reality is I kind of need to find a new career in writing. I can do legal work, but I'm kind of unemployable by virtue of the positions that I've taken. I've tried to get back into the job market. And unless big things happen in the next few years, I'm kind of in this really weird spot of how do I even use my license? Because every time I use it for elections, I tend to get investigated. And that actually happened on the last go around, where I was investigated a 6th time for merely visiting Tina Peters in prison. That initiated a whole nother round of lawfare. So every time I try to do something that's over the target, I have to deal with a bunch of nonsense. And so writing, at least, it's a little safer to get the message out.
Understand. And hopefully that will there will be a path forward that's both fun and acceptable and fruitful in whatever manner needs to be done. Thank you so much for making this time today. We will look forward to seeing new releases going forward, and we would welcome you back at any time if there's information that you believe needs to get out in a way that we can assist with. So thank you so much.
Bill, you all are incredible. You guys have been such wonderful patriots, and I'm so appreciative of our friendship over the past few years. So if anything I put out inspires you and you want to talk about it, I'd be happy to come back.
That's great. That's very gracious. Thank you. All right. We'll hope to see you soon. Take care.